I'm Eleanor Wilson, 68 years old, and until recently, I lived in the basement of the beautiful home my late husband Edward and I built together. After Edward passed, my son Kenneth and his wife Pamela moved in to help me. Their help quickly turned into a takeover, pushing me to the margins of my own life. What they never expected was that their actions would awaken a strength in me I never knew I had. I found a solution they never saw coming. Where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength when family lets you down. Edward and I shared 42 wonderful years of marriage. We met at a community picnic in 1976 when I was 24 and he was 26. He had the kindest blue eyes and a smile that made my heart skip. After dating for 2 years, we married in a small ceremony in my parents' backyard. Edward worked as an engineer while I taught 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary. We saved diligently for 7 years to buy our land and build our dream home. Our 4-bedroom colonial house on Maple Street became our forever home. Edward designed much of it himself, working alongside the builders to ensure everything was perfect. The large bay windows in the living room let in streams of golden light every morning. The kitchen had warm oak cabinets that Edward crafted by hand during evenings and weekends. Our bedroom faced east so we could wake with the sun. Every inch of that house held our love and dreams. The garden became my personal sanctuary. Over decades, I transformed the plain backyard into a haven of perennial flowers, vegetable patches, and a small pond with water lilies. The cherry tree we planted when we moved in grew to provide perfect shade for summer afternoon reading. My roses won local garden club awards 3 years running. Edward built me a charming potting shed where I could nurture seedlings and store my gardening tools. That garden was my canvas, my therapy, my joy. We were always careful with money. Edward's father had lost everything in bad investments, which taught Edward the importance of financial security. We paid extra on our mortgage every month, celebrating with a special dinner the day we made our final payment. We had substantial savings, solid retirement accounts, and no debt. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we had security and peace of mind. Kenneth came into our lives in 1981, our only child after years of trying. I can still picture his first wobbly steps across our living room carpet, his tiny hands reaching for Edward's outstretched fingers. The kitchen doorframe became the record of his growth, pencil marks climbing higher each birthday. Kenneth's laughter echoed through every room as he grew. His childhood friends running through sprinklers in the backyard during summer. His teenage band practicing too loudly in the garage. His high school graduation party under a tent in our garden. Every milestone celebrated within those loving walls. Edward retired at 62, and we had wonderful plans for travel and projects around the house. We managed a few trips to the Grand Canyon and Yellowstone. Then came the diagnosis: pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months. He lasted 8, fighting bravely to the end. I nursed him in our home, converting the living room into a bedroom when stairs became too difficult. He passed peacefully in my arms one autumn morning as sunlight streamed through our bay windows. The silence afterward was deafening. For 42 years, I had fallen asleep to Edward's gentle breathing. For 42 years, I had morning coffee with my best friend. Suddenly, at 65, I was alone in our family home. The rooms that once felt cozy now felt cavernous. Maintaining the house became challenging. The lawnmower seemed heavier. The gutters needed cleaning. The driveway needed resurfacing. Tasks Edward had always handled now fell to me. Kenneth's calls increased after the funeral. At first weekly, then twice weekly. His visits became more frequent too. He lived about 40 minutes away with Pamela, his wife of 7 years. They had no children yet, though my granddaughter Sophia, 15, from Kenneth's first marriage lived with her mother Jessica across town. Kenneth seemed genuinely concerned about me living alone. "Mom, that house is too big for one person," he would say. "And all that maintenance must be overwhelming." Pamela joined in during their visits. "Eleanor, we worry about you all alone. What if you fell? What if something happened and nobody knew?" Their suggestion came 3 months after Edward's passing. They were sitting at my kitchen table, Kenneth holding my hand with unusual tenderness. "Mom, Pamela and I have been talking. What if we sold our condo and moved in here with you? We could help with the house, and you wouldn't be alone anymore." I hesitated. I valued my independence and wasn't sure about sharing my space after decades of established routines with Edward. But the thought of family filling the house with life again was appealing. The loneliness had been crushing. We could help with expenses, cooking, yard work, Pamela added. And you'd have company every day. After a week of consideration, I agreed. The thought of having my son nearby was comforting. I spent weeks preparing for their arrival, cleaning Kenneth's old bedroom and the guest room. I cleared space in closets and the garage for their belongings. I baked Kenneth's favorite cookies and stocked the refrigerator with Pamela's preferred foods. I was genuinely excited for this new chapter, believing it would bring warmth back into my quiet life. The first month felt like a blessing. Kenneth commuted to his accounting job while Pamela worked remotely as a marketing consultant. We ate dinner together most evenings, sharing stories and laughter. Kenneth fixed the leaky faucet in the downstairs bathroom and replaced burned-out light bulbs. Pamela helped with grocery shopping and introduced me to new recipes. Having people in the house again eased my grief. The emptiness that had haunted me began to recede. The changes began subtly. One afternoon, I returned from my book club to find the kitchen completely reorganized. Dishes, pots, and appliances all moved to different cabinets. The spice rack Edward had built me, which had hung by the stove for 20 years, was gone, replaced by a modern wall-mounted organizer. "I hope you don't mind," Pamela said when she noticed my confusion. "The old arrangement wasn't very efficient. This makes much more sense." I couldn't find anything for weeks, but I said nothing, not wanting to seem ungrateful or resistant to change. Then came the conversation about the master bedroom. Kenneth found me sorting through some of Edward's clothes I was finally ready to donate. "Mom, Pamela and I were thinking," he began, perching on the edge of the bed. "This bedroom would make an ideal home office for both of us, with all this space and light. Your furniture is pretty dated anyway. What if we moved you to the guest room? We could update it for you with a new bedroom set." The thought of leaving the room I had shared with Edward for 4 decades felt like another loss. The walls held whispered conversations. The window had framed countless sunrises we'd watched together. But Kenneth made practical arguments about the larger closets they needed for 2 people, and how the en-suite bathroom would give everyone more privacy. "I guess that makes sense," I conceded, though my heart ached as I relocated to the smaller guest room down the hall. Within weeks, Edward's and my carefully chosen furnishings began disappearing from the living room. Our comfortable worn leather sofa was replaced by a modern sectional in a color Pamela called greige. The antique coffee table Edward had refinished was moved to the garage. The wall of family photos was taken down, with Pamela explaining that gallery walls are outdated, and replacing them with large abstract canvases. My beloved garden became another point of contention. One evening as I removed my gardening shoes in the side entryway, Pamela approached with a pained expression. "Eleanor, the dirt and mud you track and create so much extra cleaning. Maybe you could cut back on the gardening? Or at least use the basement entrance when you come in from the yard. It would help keep the main areas presentable." Each suggestion seemed reasonable when presented individually. Each change was explained as an improvement or modernization. But collectively, they were erasing my presence from my own home. 6 months after they moved in, Kenneth broached the subject that would change everything. We were having Sunday breakfast when he cleared his throat in that way that always preceded an uncomfortable conversation. "Mom, Pamela and I have been discussing your future here. We've noticed you seem a bit unsteady on the stairs lately." This was news to me. At 68, I remained active and mobile with no balance issues whatsoever. "We're concerned about your safety," Pamela added, not meeting my eyes. "And we thought the basement might actually work perfectly for you." They had apparently been planning this for weeks. They described how they would convert the finished basement into a private apartment for me. It had a small bathroom already. They would add a kitchenette and create a bedroom space. There was even a separate entrance so I could come and go without disturbing anyone. "But I don't want to live in the basement," I protested. "My garden, the sunlight." "The basement has windows, Mom," Kenneth countered. "And this way you wouldn't have to worry about the stairs. Plus, you'd have complete privacy. We could help you move this weekend," Pamela suggested, as if my agreement was a foregone conclusion. For days, they emphasized concerns about my safety, my mobility, my independence. They mentioned friends whose elderly parents had fallen on stairs. They pointed out how the basement would give me my own space, away from their frequent entertaining. They talked about how much easier it would be for me to manage a smaller area. Worn down by their persistence and not wanting to create conflict, I reluctantly agreed. Kenneth hired contractors to add the kitchenette, a change that took weeks, during which I remained in my upstairs bedroom, watching as the basement was transformed into what would become my new living quarters. The move downstairs marked a profound shift in our household dynamic. My existence became increasingly separate from the main house activities. The basement had small windows near the ceiling that provided minimal natural light. The space was adequate but perpetually cool due to being underground, with occasional dampness after heavy rains. I brought down my favorite reading chair, some books, and cherished photos to make it feel more like home, but the contrast to my previous sun-filled bedroom was stark. The separation became emotional as well as physical. I would hear footsteps and voices above, laughter and music from gatherings I wasn't invited to join. When Sophia visited her father, she would sneak downstairs to spend time with me, her face troubled by my new living situation. "Grandma, why are you living down here? Don't you like your room upstairs better?" she asked during one visit, her young face confused and concerned. I didn't have the heart to explain the full truth to her. Instead, I smiled and told her it was easier for me this way, but the hurt in her eyes told me she wasn't convinced. The most painful realization came gradually over the next few months. I was no longer welcome in my own home unless specifically invited. Kenneth and Pamela would act mildly surprised if I came upstairs outside of predetermined meal times. Pamela began suggesting I use the exterior basement entrance rather than coming through the main house, to preserve my privacy. My beloved garden, which had been my solace after Edward's death, became off limits without prior arrangement. "We're thinking of entertaining this weekend," Pamela would say. "Could you maybe garden on Monday instead so everything looks nice?" One afternoon, I came upstairs to find strangers carrying out my antique secretary desk, a wedding gift from my parents. "Oh, Mom," Kenneth said, looking momentarily guilty. "We're just decluttering a bit. That old desk was taking up space in the dining room." "But that was my mother's desk," I said, my voice trembling. "We put the money in your account," he replied dismissively. And honestly, the style really didn't work with our new dining set. The final blow came on a spring afternoon, when I overheard Kenneth and Pamela in the backyard with a man carrying a clipboard and measuring tape. Curious, I moved closer to my small basement window. "The garden will have to go, of course," Pamela was saying. "We're thinking an in-ground pool would work perfectly here." "Mom's garden? She'll be devastated," Kenneth replied, though his tone suggested mere inconvenience rather than genuine concern. "She hardly comes out here anymore anyway," Pamela answered. "And we need to make this space work for our future, not cling to the past." That evening I lay in my basement bedroom listening to their dinner party above, the clinking of glasses and bursts of laughter filtering through the ceiling. I heard Kenneth's voice, slightly elevated from wine. "Once we finally have the house to ourselves, we're planning a complete renovation. Pamela has amazing ideas for opening up the kitchen to the living area." The implication was clear. They were waiting for me to either move to a nursing home or pass away. The home Edward and I had built with love, that I legally owned outright, had been mentally transferred to them already. In their minds, I was merely a temporary inconvenience in their future home. My basement apartment was functional but depressing. The contractors had installed a basic kitchenette with a mini refrigerator, microwave, and small sink. The bathroom had been updated with grab bars that I didn't need. The main living area had been divided with bookcases to create a makeshift bedroom space. I had no door for privacy, just an opening between the shelving units. The small windows sat at ground level, providing views of ankles walking by and limited daylight. During winter months, the sun's angle meant I received almost no direct sunlight. The concrete floors remained cold despite the area rugs I had brought down. Humidity was a constant issue, requiring a dehumidifier that hummed continuously in the background. I tried my best to create warmth in this underground space. I arranged my remaining photos on every available surface, memories of happier times with Edward, Kenneth as a child, Sophia's school pictures. I added lamps in every corner to combat the gloom. My bookshelf held treasured novels and gardening references. I placed my comfortable armchair in the spot that received the most natural light, creating a reading nook where I spent most of my days. Despite my efforts, isolation became my constant companion. Kenneth and Pamela established a household routine that largely excluded me. They entertained frequently, the sound of dinner parties and cocktail gatherings drifting down to my basement dwelling. Only occasionally would they invite me to join when certain friends or relatives visited, presenting me briefly as if to prove they were taking good care of me before I was escorted back downstairs. One evening, I overheard Pamela speaking to someone in the kitchen when she thought I couldn't hear. It's challenging having Eleanor here. She's becoming needier by the day. We practically have to schedule our lives around her needs. This characterization was baffling. I had been making every effort to be unobtrusive, often eating simple meals in my basement rather than joining them upstairs. I was still driving myself to appointments and handling my own affairs. The neediness she described existed only in her narrative. My access to the house I owned became increasingly restricted. Kenneth suggested I text before coming upstairs to make sure I wasn't interrupting important work calls. Pamela created a schedule for when I could use the laundry room. My morning ritual of coffee in the sunny kitchen nook was discouraged because Pamela needs that space for her morning meditation. The garden restrictions hurt most deeply. What had once been my daily joy became an occasional privilege. We're having the Browns over this weekend, Mom. Could you hold off on gardening until Monday? We don't want the yard to look messy. Or Pamela's trying to work on her laptop on the patio. Your gardening is distracting her. The rose bushes Edward and I had planted on our 10th anniversary began to show signs of neglect. The vegetable garden I had maintained for decades lay fallow. The bird feeders went unfilled. Watching from my small window as my carefully tended plants withered felt like watching old friends suffer. One afternoon, I came upstairs to find Kenneth and a stranger examining my grandmother's cherry-wood dining set. This should fetch a good price, the man was saying. Antiques like this are hard to find in such good condition. What's happening? I asked, startled. Kenneth had the decency to look embarrassed. Oh, Mom, we're just getting rid of some of the old furniture. The dining room is going to be Pamela's new yoga studio. But that dining set has been in our family for generations, I protested. Your father refinished it by hand before you were born. Mom, we've discussed this. The house needs updating. These old pieces don't fit our aesthetic. Besides, you're not using it anymore. When I checked my bank account later, I found a deposit for less than half what I knew the dining set was worth. I cried myself to sleep that night, mourning not just the furniture but the memories attached to it. Thanksgiving dinners, Kenneth's birthday celebrations, Edward and I working on jigsaw puzzles on rainy evenings. All those moments were being erased piece by piece. The holidays brought additional pain. Thanksgiving had always been my domain, with traditional family recipes and decorations accumulated over decades. That year, Pamela announced she would be hosting and preparing the meal. To give you a break, Eleanor. My sister Mildred and her husband Vincent came, along with Kenneth's first wife Jessica and Sophia. As I emerged from the basement, Mildred's face registered shock she couldn't quite hide. Eleanor, you're coming from downstairs? She asked during a private moment in the kitchen. That's where I live now, I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. Kenneth and Pamela thought it would be safer for me. In the basement? Mildred's eyes narrowed. The Eleanor I know would never agree to that. You've always loved your bedroom with the morning sun. I changed the subject, unwilling to air family problems during the holiday. But I noticed Mildred watching Kenneth and Pamela with new awareness throughout the day, particularly when Pamela directed me to go relax downstairs while they cleaned up. The defining moment came in early spring. From my basement window, I spotted Pamela leading a man in khakis and a polo shirt around the backyard. I recognized him as Lucas Thompson, a local landscape designer known for high-end pool installations. They were standing in the middle of my dormant garden, Pamela gesturing expansively while Lucas made notes. We'd want to remove all of this, obviously, Pamela was saying, waving dismissively at my carefully planned flower beds. The pool would go here with the hot tub in that corner. We're thinking a complete entertainment area with an outdoor kitchen along that wall. What about these mature plantings? Lucas asked. Some of these specimens are quite valuable. That Japanese maple alone. All of it goes, Pamela interrupted. We want a clean slate. Kenneth's mother used to be an avid gardener, but she's not able to maintain it anymore. We're looking toward our future here. That evening I sat quietly in my basement room, listening to Kenneth and Pamela talking in the kitchen above. The pool estimate came in higher than expected, Kenneth was saying. But once we finally have the house to ourselves, we can tap into the equity for the renovation. How much longer do you think before she agrees to Sunrise Acres? Pamela asked, referring to an assisted living facility they had been suggesting I tour. Dr. Matthews thinks she's still too independent for assisted living, Kenneth replied. But I've been documenting her confusion and mobility issues for months now. Eventually, we'll build enough of a case. And the house is definitely coming to you when you know? Pamela's voice dropped even lower. Dad's will left everything to Mom, but she promised me years ago that I'd inherit the house. It's just a matter of time. Their words confirmed what I had long suspected, but had been unwilling to fully acknowledge. They weren't helping me or providing companionship. They were waiting me out, documenting imaginary decline, pushing me toward institutionalization so they could claim my home. The garden destruction was just the beginning of erasing all evidence of my life with Edward. I lay awake that night, tears sliding silently into my pillow. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. My own son was actively working to push me out of my home, fabricating concerns about my health, treating me as an obstacle to his inheritance rather than his mother who had loved and raised him. For the first time since Edward died, I felt truly alone. The morning after overhearing Kenneth and Pamela's conversation, I woke with swollen eyes and a heaviness in my chest that made it difficult to breathe. I moved mechanically through my morning routine, making coffee in my tiny kitchenette, unable to summon the energy to face the day. The basement walls seemed to close in around me, the low ceiling pressing down with the weight of my son's betrayal. I had always prided myself on being strong. During Edward's illness, the doctors had marveled at my resilience as I managed his care, the household, and my own grief simultaneously. But this betrayal from Kenneth, the child I had nurtured and loved unconditionally, broke something fundamental inside me. The tears came without warning throughout the day, my hands shaking as I attempted to read, to watch television, to distract myself from the painful reality. That afternoon I forced myself to drive to the local grocery store, needing both supplies and escape from the basement's confines. In the produce section, arranging apples in her cart, stood Gladys Roberts, my dear friend of 30 years who had moved to a senior community after her husband Harold passed. We had fallen out of regular contact since Kenneth and Pamela moved in, another relationship that had withered under their constraints. Eleanor Wilson, is that you? Gladys exclaimed, embracing me warmly. It's been ages. How are you doing, dear? Something in her genuine concern cracked my careful composure. To my horror, tears welled in my eyes right there between the apples and oranges. Oh, Gladys, was all I could manage. Gladys took one look at my face and abandoned her shopping cart. We're going for coffee right now, she declared, linking her arm through mine. Some things are more important than groceries. At the small cafe next door, seated in a quiet corner booth, the whole story poured out of me. The initial arrangement, the gradual takeover, the basement banishment, the isolation, the overheard conversations and plans for my garden. Gladys listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly troubled. Eleanor, honey, she said gently when I finally ran out of words. What they're doing is elder abuse. Plain and simple. No, I protested automatically. Kenneth is just trying to modernize the house. Maybe I am becoming a burden. Stop right there, Gladys cut in firmly. I've known you for 30 years. You're more capable at 68 than most people are at 40. They're manipulating you, isolating you, and taking over your property. And you're letting them because he's your son and you love him. Her direct words hit me like cold water. I had been making excuses for Kenneth's behavior, unable to face the truth that my own child was taking advantage of me. But why? I whispered. We've always been close. I don't understand how he could treat me this way. People do terrible things when property and money are involved, Gladys said sadly. Even to those they supposedly love. My question is, what are you going to do about it? I had no answer. The thought of confronting Kenneth and Pamela filled me with dread. The thought of continuing as things seemed unbearable. Over the next week, I began paying closer attention to Kenneth's interactions with others regarding me. When his college friend Martin visited, I overheard a conversation that chilled me. "How's your mom doing?" Martin asked. "Declining," Kenneth replied with a sigh that sounded rehearsed. "Her cognitive functions are slipping. She gets confused about where things are in the house, forgets conversations we've had. That's why we moved her to the basement apartment, for her safety and our peace of mind." "That's rough, man," Martin sympathized. "My dad went through something similar before we moved him to assisted living." I stood frozen in the hallway, hearing my son describe a version of me that didn't exist. I hadn't been confused or forgetful. I had been adjusting to them constantly moving and removing my belongings without permission. The narrative Kenneth was creating painted me as mentally declining rather than justifiably upset about being displaced in my own home. The final breaking point came when I was searching for my birth certificate for a passport renewal. In Kenneth's home office, formerly Edward's study, I found a folder labeled Mom in the filing cabinet. Inside were printouts of assisted living facilities, a document where Kenneth had detailed supposed instances of my confusion and unsafe behaviors, and most shockingly, tax forms where he had listed himself as my caretaker, claiming deductions for my support despite the fact that I was financially independent and he lived in my house rent-free. That night, sleep eluded me entirely. I lay awake in my basement bedroom, the weight of reality crushing my chest. I had raised Kenneth with love, supported his education, celebrated his successes, comforted his failures. Edward and I had given him everything we could. How had it come to this? When had my son decided I was merely an obstacle to his inheritance? As dawn broke, sending thin slivers of light through my small windows, clarity finally came. I had been so focused on not being a burden, on accommodating Kenneth and Pamela's wishes, that I had forgotten a fundamental truth. This was my house. My name alone was on the deed. Edward and I had paid off the mortgage through decades of hard work and careful saving. While I had verbally told Kenneth he would inherit it someday, that day had not yet come. I rose with newfound determination and retrieved my important documents from their hiding place in my old sewing box. The deed to the house, my bank statements, Edward's life insurance policy, our wills. I spread them across my small table, confirming what I already knew. Legally, everything remained in my name. Kenneth had no claim to the property or my finances unless I granted it. For the first time in over a year, I felt a flicker of power returning. I might be living in the basement, but I still held the keys to the kingdom. Kenneth and Pamela had been so confident in their manipulation that they hadn't considered I might fight back. The next day, while Kenneth was at work and Pamela was at her yoga class, I drove to the office of Raymond Daniels, an elder law attorney Gladys had recommended. "Mrs. Wilson," Raymond said after hearing my situation, "what they're doing is unconscionable, and you have every legal right to reclaim your home and your life." "What are my options?" I asked, my voice stronger than it had been in months. "As the sole owner of the property, you could evict them," Raymond explained. "Or, given your expressed desire to avoid direct confrontation, there are other approaches we could consider." For the first time since Edward's death, I felt a sense of possibility rather than loss. The path forward wasn't clear yet, but knowing I had legal options gave me strength I thought had been permanently extinguished. That evening, as I descended the basement stairs after a brief, awkward dinner with Kenneth and Pamela, I realized I had reached my decision point. I could continue as I was, gradually being erased from my own life, or I could take action to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The answer, when it finally crystallized, was both terrifying and exhilarating. It would require courage I wasn't sure I possessed, but the alternative had become unthinkable. Edward would never have allowed me to be treated this way. It was time I showed the same regard for myself that he would have demanded on my behalf. As I drifted to sleep that night, I felt a strange sense of peace. The grief remained, but alongside it grew a seedling of determination. Kenneth and Pamela had underestimated me, assuming my love for my son would continue to blind me to their manipulations. They were about to discover that beneath the accommodating exterior of a seemingly compliant widow was the steel spine Edward had always admired. Part 6. Developing the plan. The morning after my meeting with Raymond Daniels, I woke with purpose for the first time in months. Over coffee in my basement kitchenette, I began outlining my thoughts in a small notebook Edward had given me years ago. If I was going to reclaim my life, I needed a comprehensive plan that addressed every aspect of my situation. Raymond had been clear about my legal standing. As the sole owner of the property, you have every right to ask them to leave, he had explained. But given the emotional complexities and your desire to avoid direct confrontation that might permanently damage your relationship with your son, we should consider alternatives. We had discussed several options, from family mediation to legal notices. But one suggestion had resonated more strongly than the others. Sometimes, Raymond had said carefully, the simplest solution is to remove the source of conflict entirely. The house itself had become the battleground. Perhaps the answer wasn't fighting over it, but letting it go on my terms. First, I needed to understand exactly what I was working with financially. I spent the morning reviewing my accounts, insurance policies, and investments. Edward had been meticulous about our finances, and I had maintained his organizational system after his death. We had the house, fully paid for and worth substantially more than when we'd purchased it. Our retirement accounts were healthy. Edward's life insurance had provided additional security. I had resources that Kenneth and Pamela didn't know about, accounts they couldn't access. My second call was to Marcus Jenkins, a realtor Gladys had worked with when selling her home. I arranged to meet him at a coffee shop rather than at the house, wanting complete privacy for our conversation. Based on recent sales in your neighborhood and the size of your property, Marcus told me after hearing the details, your home could list for around $750,000, possibly more given the current market. If you're serious about selling, I could have it listed within a week. The figure momentarily took my breath away. Edward and I had paid $89,000 for the property decades ago. The potential profit would secure my future completely independently of Kenneth. How quickly could it sell? I asked. In your neighborhood, with good schools and the current inventory shortage? Potentially very quickly. Days or weeks rather than months, especially if we price it competitively. This was crucial information for my planning. I thanked Marcus and promised to be in touch soon, once I had considered all my options. My next step was to explore alternative living arrangements. If I sold the house, where would I go? I had no interest in assisted living, despite Kenneth's persistent suggestions. I was healthy, active, and independent. What I wanted was a place that was truly mine, where I could create a new chapter without the painful memories of betrayal the house now held. Online research led me to Riverside Meadows, a luxury condominium complex for adults 55 and older. It offered single-level living, security features, and amenities like a community garden, swimming pool, and social activities. Most importantly, it was located just 10 minutes from Sophia's mother's home, which would make it easier to maintain my relationship with my granddaughter. I scheduled a private tour for the following day while Kenneth was at work. The moment I stepped into the model unit, I felt a sense of possibility. The open floor plan was flooded with natural light. The kitchen was modern and accessible. The master bedroom had a walk-in closet larger than my entire basement apartment. The balcony overlooked a beautifully landscaped courtyard with raised garden beds available for residents. We actually have a corner unit available on the third floor, the sales consultant, Linda, told me. It has an expanded balcony with room for container gardening and views of both the courtyard and the river. The price was substantial but well within my means if I sold the house. For the first time, I could envision a future that didn't involve being marginalized in my own home. A place where I could entertain friends without permission, garden without restriction, and live with dignity. As my plan took shape, I realized I needed to protect my assets from potential interference. The following day, I visited First National Bank and opened a new account in my name only, one Kenneth couldn't access as he did with my checking account. I arranged for my Social Security and pension deposits to be redirected to this new account starting the following month. Next came the painful process of deciding what belongings truly mattered to me. The house contained 40 years of accumulated possessions, but many of the most precious items had already been sold or relegated to the basement. I began a mental inventory of what I would take when the time came. Photo albums, Edward's watch and wedding ring, the quilts my mother had made, my grandmother's jewelry, the first edition books Edward had collected. I realized I would need safe storage for these items before executing my plan. I couldn't risk Kenneth discovering them missing and becoming suspicious. Gladys offered her spare bedroom. "Bring whatever you need to protect," she insisted. "It can stay as long as necessary." Over the next 2 weeks, I gradually relocated my most precious possessions. A photo album one day hidden in my tote bag. Edward's watch and cufflinks another. Each item carefully wrapped and transported to Gladys's home when I knew Kenneth and Pamela were out or busy. The process was emotionally draining but empowering. Each rescued treasure represented a reclamation of my past and future. Throughout this period, I maintained a careful facade of normalcy. I continued my quiet routines, avoided confrontation, and gave no indication of my developing plans. I noted with bitter amusement how little attention Kenneth and Pamela paid to my activities as long as I remained unobtrusive. My increasing absences went largely unremarked upon, interpreted as doctor's appointments or errands rather than strategic planning. During this time, my relationship with Sophia became an unexpected source of strength. At 15, she was perceptive and sensitive, uncomfortable with how her father and stepmother treated me. She began visiting more frequently, often coming directly from school before Kenneth and Pamela returned from work. "Grandma, I hate that you live down here," she confided during one visit. "Dad says it's for your safety, but you seem sad here." Her genuine concern touched me deeply. Over several visits, I carefully listened as she shared her own frustrations about feeling caught between households and her anxiety about college. "Mom says she can't afford to help much with tuition," Sophia explained. "And Dad and Pamela keep saying they're saving for their own future family. I might have to give up on Westfield University." Westfield was her dream school, known for its excellent journalism program. The disappointment in her voice as she discussed compromising her educational goals sparked an additional dimension to my planning. Perhaps something positive could emerge from this painful situation. The final piece fell into place when Kenneth and Pamela announced their upcoming vacation, a 2-week trip to Hawaii they had been planning for months. "Will you be okay alone, Mom?" Kenneth asked perfunctorily over dinner, his attention more focused on his phone than my response. "Of course," I assured him. "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. We've stocked the refrigerator downstairs with meals," Pamela added. "And Mrs. Peterson next door said she'll check on you every few days." Their lack of genuine concern was both hurtful and convenient. 2 weeks would give me ample time to execute my plan without interruption or explanation. The day before their departure, I confirmed the final details with Marcus, the realtor. The house would be listed the day after Kenneth and Pamela left. I had already signed the necessary paperwork and approved the listing photos Marcus had taken during a discreet visit while Kenneth and Pamela were at work. I also finalized arrangements with Linda at Riverside Meadows. The corner unit would be held for me pending the sale of my house. The timing was aligning perfectly. That evening, I prepared a simple dinner and listened as Kenneth and Pamela excitedly discussed their travel plans. They barely addressed me except to review emergency contact information and remind me not to touch anything in their redecorated rooms. As I descended to the basement that night, I took a final look around the house that had been my home for 40 years. Despite the changes Kenneth and Pamela had made, I could still see echoes of the life Edward and I had built together. For a moment, sadness threatened to overwhelm me. Was I really prepared to let it all go? Then I remembered Kenneth's voice discussing how they would renovate once we finally have the house to ourselves. I remembered Pamela showing the landscape designer my beloved garden, saying all of it goes. I remembered being directed to use the basement entrance so as not to disturb them. I remembered the systematic erasure of my presence from my own home. My resolve solidified. This house had already been taken from me emotionally. Now I would reclaim my power by choosing to leave it on my own terms. Kenneth and Pamela thought they were waiting me out, assuming the house would eventually be theirs. They were about to discover how thoroughly they had underestimated me. I slept peacefully that night for the first time in months, secure in my decision and ready to implement the plan that would change everything. Kenneth and Pamela departed early on a Saturday morning, their SUV loaded with luggage for their Hawaiian vacation. I stood in the driveway, waving goodbye with a smile that felt foreign on my face after months of suppressed emotions. As their car disappeared around the corner, an extraordinary sensation washed over me, freedom. For the first time in over a year, I had the house to myself. No one monitoring my movements, questioning my decisions, or making me feel like an intruder in my own home. I allowed myself exactly 15 minutes to savor this feeling before springing into action. The moment I closed the front door, I pulled out my phone and called Marcus Jenkins. "They're gone," I told him. "We can proceed immediately." Marcus arrived within the hour, professional and efficient, carrying a real estate sign in one hand and a folder of paperwork in the other. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Eleanor?" he asked as we sat at the kitchen table that was no longer mine in any meaningful sense. "More certain than I've been about anything since Edward died," I replied, my voice steady. We reviewed the listing details one final time. The asking price was $775,000, which Marcus assured me was competitive but not undervalued. The description highlighted the property's spacious rooms, mature landscaping, and desirable neighborhood. The professional photographs Marcus had taken during his discreet visit showcased the home beautifully, though I noted with a pang that little evidence of my personal touch remained visible in the images of the main floors. I signed the final authorizations and within hours, the listing went live on multiple real estate websites. Marcus installed the for sale sign at the edge of the front yard, positioned so it would be immediately visible to anyone approaching the house. "Now we wait," Marcus said. "But given the current market and this location, I don't think we'll be waiting long." He was right. By Sunday afternoon, Marcus called to inform me that he had scheduled 7 showings for Monday. By Monday evening we had 3 offers, 2 at asking price and 1 above. By Tuesday morning, after a brief bidding war, we accepted an offer of $805,000 from a young family with 2 children, with a request for a quick closing. The speed was dizzying but exactly what I needed. I wanted everything finalized before Kenneth and Pamela returned. The buyers were motivated and flexible, willing to work with my timeline. Their lender fast-tracked the approval process. The home inspection was scheduled and completed within days, revealing only minor issues that I agreed to address with a credit at closing rather than repairs. While the sale proceeded, I focused on my own transition plans. I formally applied for the corner unit at Riverside Meadows, providing proof of the pending home sale as financial verification. Linda, the sales consultant, expedited the application process, and by the end of the first week I had been approved. We scheduled the closing for the condominium to align with the closing on my house, allowing the proceeds from one to directly fund the other. The task of packing my remaining belongings was both practical and deeply emotional. I worked methodically through the basement, carefully wrapping photos and mementos, selecting clothes and personal items. I hired a small moving company recommended by Gladys to transport everything to my new condominium, once it was ready. The process forced me to confront how much I had already lost. So many treasured pieces had been sold or discarded by Kenneth and Pamela. The antique secretary desk from my parents. The dining set Edward had refinished. The collection of crystal figurines from our anniversary trips. But focusing on these losses would only dilute my resolve. Instead, I channeled my energy into creating my new future. I ventured upstairs during the day, reclaiming spaces that had been made to feel off limits to me. In Edward's former study, now Kenneth's home office, I retrieved the remaining family photo albums from the back of the closet. From the attic, I rescued boxes of holiday decorations and Sophia's baby clothes that I had preserved. From the garage, I recovered Edward's toolbox and the carved wooden box he had made for our 25th anniversary. With each item secured, I felt stronger. These weren't just possessions. They were tangible connections to my history and identity that Kenneth and Pamela had attempted to erase. Reclaiming them was an act of self-preservation. 10 days after Kenneth and Pamela's departure, both closings were scheduled for the same day. The morning began at my attorney's office, where I signed the papers transferring ownership of my home of 40 years to the young couple, who would create their own memories within its walls. The proceeds were wired directly to the next closing at Riverside Meadows, where I signed the documents that made the corner unit officially mine. After setting aside funds for moving expenses and new furnishings, I met with Raymond Daniels, the elder law attorney, to establish a trust for Sophia's education. I allocated $300,000 to ensure she could attend Westfield University without financial concern, with provisions for graduate school if she chose that path. The trust was structured so that neither Kenneth nor Pamela could access or control these funds. They were exclusively for Sophia's educational expenses. The remainder of the proceeds I placed in conservative investments that would provide me with additional income beyond my existing retirement funds. For the first time since Edward's death, I felt completely secure in my financial independence. With the legalities completed, I focused on transforming my new condominium into a home. I purchased a comfortable bed with a luxurious mattress, a contrast to the spare room setup in the basement. I selected a dining table sized perfectly for entertaining friends. I found a desk for letter writing and reading that reminded me of the one Edward had built. Each purchase was deliberate, chosen to create the warm, welcoming environment I had been denied. The most joyful selection was plants for my balcony garden. I chose colorful containers and filled them with herb seedlings, compact rose varieties and flowering perennials. The garden center delivered everything directly to my new home, and I spent a blissful afternoon arranging the containers to maximize sunlight and create a peaceful retreat. By the time the movers delivered my remaining possessions from the basement, my new condominium already felt more like home than the basement ever had. I arranged my saved photos, books, and keepsakes throughout the space. I hung curtains that welcomed morning light rather than blocking it. I placed Edward's reading chair by the large window overlooking the river. The night before Kenneth and Pamela were scheduled to return from Hawaii, I slept in my new bed in my new home. The sense of peace was profound. For the first time in over a year, I wasn't listening for footsteps above me or feeling like an unwelcome guest. I was simply home. The following morning, I awoke to a series of increasingly frantic text messages and missed calls from Kenneth. "Mom, there's a for sale sign in our yard. Call me immediately. Mom, the neighbor says someone bought the house. What's going on? Mom, where are you? Call me now." I took a deep breath and texted back a simple message. "I'm fine. We'll call soon." I made myself a leisurely breakfast on my new kitchen counter, brewed coffee in my new coffee maker, and sat on my balcony among my new plants. Only then, feeling centered and strong, did I call my son. "What the hell is going on?" Kenneth demanded without preamble when he answered. "We just got off the plane to messages that our house is sold. The neighbor said you've been gone for days." "The house was never yours, Kenneth," I replied, my voice calm and steady. "It was mine. And yes, I sold it. The new owners take possession next week." The silence on the other end lasted several seconds before Kenneth exploded. "You can't do that. That's our home. Where are we supposed to live? Where are you?" "I'm in my new home," I explained. "A lovely condominium that I purchased with the proceeds from the house sale. As for where you and Pamela will live, that's for you to decide. You have until next Friday to remove your belongings from the house." What followed was a tirade of accusations, threats, and disbelief. Kenneth and Pamela cut their vacation short and returned that same day. They arrived at the house to find me already gone, my basement cleared of my possessions, and a legal notice posted on the door confirming the sale and new ownership date. When they tracked me down at Riverside Meadows, the confrontation was exactly as painful as I had anticipated. Kenneth alternated between rage and manipulation, first threatening legal action, then attempting to make me feel guilty for abandoning them, finally suggesting I was mentally incompetent to have made such decisions. Pamela was less restrained, her carefully maintained facade crumbling completely as she berated me for tricking them and stealing their future. I listened calmly to their accusations, secure in the knowledge that my actions were legally sound and morally justified. "I heard you discussing your plans for when you finally had the house to yourselves," I told them when they finally paused for breath. "I heard you plotting to document my non-existent confusion and decline. I found the tax forms where you claim to be my caretaker. I saw the garden plans for removing every plant I've nurtured for decades. You thought I was too old, too compliant, or too afraid of losing my son to stand up for myself. The shock on their faces confirmed they had never considered I might have been aware of their machinations. You relegated me to the basement of my own home, I continued, my voice steady despite the emotion of the moment. You sold my belongings without permission. You restricted my movements in the house I owned. You waited for me to die or become infirm enough to institutionalize so you could claim my property. So yes, I sold the house. And I used the money to secure my future and Sophia's education, which you informed her you wouldn't support. Kenneth attempted several more arguments, but each one fell flat against the reality of what they had done. His final threat to contest the sale based on my diminished capacity was quickly dismissed when Raymond informed him that multiple professionals had documented my complete competence throughout the sales process. As they finally left, Kenneth turned back with one last attempt at manipulation. I hope you realize this means you've lost your son, he said coldly. Was a house really worth that? I looked at him steadily, the son I had raised and loved, now unrecognizable in his entitlement and cruelty. I lost my son the day he decided his inheritance was more important than his mother's dignity, I replied. The house was just a building. What matters is that I've reclaimed my life. As their car pulled away, I felt a complex mixture of grief and liberation. The relationship was damaged, perhaps irreparably. But for the first time since Edward's death, I felt truly alive, standing on my own strength rather than being diminished by those who should have cherished me most. The first few weeks in my new condominium passed in a blur of activity and adjustment. After the confrontation with Kenneth and Pamela, I experienced a roller coaster of emotions. Relief at having escaped their manipulation, grief over the fractured relationship with my son, excitement about my new independence, and occasional doubt about my dramatic solution. During sleepless nights, I questioned whether I had been too extreme, whether I could have found another way to assert my boundaries without completely upending everyone's lives. These doubts were quickly followed by reminders of reality. Kenneth claiming I was cognitively declining to friends, Pamela planning to destroy my garden, both of them waiting for me to either die or become incapacitated enough to force into a care facility. The basement exile. No, I had made the right choice. The house had become a battleground I could never win as long as I remained within its walls. Kenneth's threat of legal action proved empty. His attorney apparently advised him that he had no grounds to challenge the sale since the house had been solely in my name. Instead, he sent a formal letter through his lawyer demanding compensation for improvements they had made to the property and furniture they claimed to have purchased. Raymond responded with a detailed accounting of the furniture they had sold without my permission, and the fair market rental value of the home they had occupied rent-free for over a year. The matter was quickly dropped. Weeks of silence followed, broken only by occasional angry text messages whenever Kenneth encountered another consequence of his actions. When their lease application was denied due to insufficient income without my support, when they discovered I had changed my will, when Pamela's parents refused to loan them money for a down payment on a new house. My new home became my sanctuary during this difficult period. The corner unit exceeded my expectations, with morning sunlight streaming through eastern windows and afternoon light from the west. The open floor plan allowed me to move easily between kitchen, dining area, and living room. The balcony quickly transformed into a thriving container garden that attracted butterflies and hummingbirds. The community itself provided unexpected blessings. Unlike the isolation I had experienced in the basement, Riverside Meadows offered constant opportunities for social connection. A weekly book club met in the community room. Morning coffee gatherings brought residents together. The garden club welcomed my experience and enthusiasm. For the first time since Edward's death, I found myself building new friendships with people who valued my company and perspectives. Gladys became a regular visitor, marveling at my transformation from the tearful woman she had encountered in the grocery store months earlier. "Eleanor, you're positively glowing," she commented during one of our lunch dates on my balcony. I hardly recognized the woman who was crying over produce. I hardly recognized myself, I admitted. I spent so long trying to accommodate Kenneth and Pamela that I forgot who I was. Living here, making my own decisions without criticism or constraint, has reminded me of my own strength. The greatest joy of this period came unexpectedly one afternoon when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Sophia standing nervously in the hallway, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Grandma," she said hesitantly, "is it okay that I came? Dad doesn't know I'm here." I welcomed her with open arms, thrilled by her presence but concerned about the secrecy. "Your father and I may have our differences," I told her as we settled in the living room, "but I would never want to come between you and him." "He's been awful," Sophia confided. "He and Pamela fight constantly now about money and whose fault it is they lost the house. He says terrible things about you. I just needed to see for myself that you're okay." We spent hours talking that afternoon. I showed her around my new home, introduced her to neighbors we encountered in the hallway, and shared iced tea on the balcony among my flourishing plants. Her delight in my new circumstances was evident and touching. "This place is amazing, Grandma," she exclaimed. "You seem so much happier here than you were in that basement." As the afternoon drew to a close, I made a decision. Over dinner at my new dining table, I told Sophia about the educational trust one had established for her. "Your dream of attending Westfield University," I said. "It doesn't have to remain just a dream. I've set aside funds specifically for your education. Enough for undergraduate and graduate studies, if that's the path you choose." Sophia's expression transformed from confusion to disbelief to overwhelming gratitude. Tears filled her eyes as the implications sank in. "But why?" she whispered. "After how Dad treated you. You are not responsible for your father's actions," I explained gently. "My love for you has never wavered. Edward and I always believed in the power of education to transform lives. This is what he would have wanted for you, and it's what I want too." Our relationship blossomed in the months that followed. Sophia visited regularly, sometimes with her mother Jessica's knowledge, sometimes in those early days without telling her father. Eventually, Kenneth became aware of our continued connection, leading to another difficult conversation when he called to confront me. "You had no right to tell Sophia about that money," he began without preamble. "That should have been my inheritance. That money came from the sale of my house," I reminded him calmly. "The house you were so certain would eventually be yours that you relegated me to the basement to wait for my decline or death. Mom, that's not fair. We were trying to help you. Were you helping me when you told friends I was becoming cognitively impaired? When you documented my supposed confusion to build a case for assisted living? When you claimed tax benefits as my caretaker while selling my possessions without permission?" His silence acknowledged what we both knew was true. "I don't expect you to understand or approve of my decisions," I continued more gently. "But they were mine to make. The relationship between Sophia and me is separate from our conflict. She remains my granddaughter regardless of what has happened between us." The conversation ended unresolved, but it marked the beginning of a slow, tentative thawing. Kenneth's initial rage gradually subsided as the reality of the situation settled. Pamela, interestingly, was the first to reach out with what approximated an apology, calling one evening 3 months after the sale. "I've been thinking about how things unfolded," she said stiffly. "While I still believe we were trying to help, I can see how our actions might have seemed inconsiderate from your perspective. It wasn't a full acknowledgement of the manipulation and mistreatment, but it was a start." Kenneth followed with occasional text messages, brief and practical at first, gradually becoming more personal. He and Pamela had found an apartment they could afford. He had received a promotion at work. They were adjusting to their new circumstances. I responded with equivalent civility, neither pushing for reconciliation nor rejecting the tentative overtures. The wound was still too fresh, the betrayal too profound for immediate forgiveness. But I left the door open for a relationship built on mutual respect, rather than exploitation. My own life continued to expand and flourish. I joined a watercolor class at the local community center, discovering a latent artistic talent Edward had always encouraged. I volunteered at the public library, reading to children during weekly story hours. I traveled to the coast for a week with Gladys and 2 other friends from Riverside Meadows, my first vacation in years. The trust one established for Sophia became a source of tremendous satisfaction as she applied to colleges during her senior year. Her acceptance to Westfield University's journalism program, complete with a small merit scholarship to complement my financial support, was a moment of pure joy for both of us. Kenneth and Jessica attended her high school graduation alongside me, our mutual love for Sophia creating a fragile bridge across the chasm of past hurts. 6 months after moving to Riverside Meadows, I hosted my first dinner party in my new home. Sophia was there, along with Gladys, my new friends from the garden club, and even Jessica, who had become an unexpected ally. The table was set with new dishes I had selected. The menu comprised of favorite recipes I had been unable to prepare in my restricted basement kitchenette. As conversation and laughter filled the space, I looked around at the life I had created from the ashes of betrayal and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Later that evening, after the guests had departed, Sophia helped me clear the last dishes. "Grandma," she said thoughtfully, "are you ever going to forgive Dad completely?" I considered her question carefully. "Forgiveness is a journey, not a destination," I finally replied. "I'm working toward it, for my peace as much as for his. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or allowing myself to be vulnerable to the same treatment again. It means acknowledging what happened, learning from it, and choosing to move forward without bitterness." "You're the strongest person I know," Sophia said, embracing me tightly. "I hope I inherit that from you, even more than the money for college." Those words, more than anything else, confirmed that I had made the right choice. By standing up for myself, I had not only reclaimed my own dignity, but had provided a powerful example for my granddaughter about self-respect and resilience. The journey from basement exile to my new life hadn't been easy or without pain. The relationship with my son remained complicated, a work in progress that might never fully heal. But as I stood on my balcony that evening, watching the sunset reflect on the river, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Edward would have been proud of my courage. I had finally become the strong, independent woman he had always believed me to be, even when I doubted myself. Life continues to unfold in unexpected ways. Each day brings new opportunities for growth, connection, and joy. I've learned that it's never too late to start again, to stand up for yourself, to create boundaries that protect your dignity and well-being. Family relationships are precious, but they should never come at the cost of your self-worth. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect yourself from people who should have been caring for you? How did you find the strength to stand up for yourself? Share your experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding courage in difficult circumstances. Remember, sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most beautiful new beginnings. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the strength to write your own next chapter when life calls for courage.